Hey everyone. Today I've got something a little different for you. Last year I sat down with my friends over at the Forward Unto Dawn podcast and had a long chat about the making of The Road to Halo. I was joined by Stephen Loftus and Wilson Van Ness, who both contributed to the video, to talk in depth about its creation, the challenges that came up during production, and the thought that went into piecing together the narrative of the Halo universe in such detail. If you have yet to watch that video, I highly recommend doing so first, and then coming back here to listen to a behind-the-scenes breakdown of just what went into its creation. The fine folks at Forward Unto Dawn were kind enough to allow me to upload this discussion to Offscreen in its entirety. So be sure to go and check out their website when you're done here, and look through their library of podcast episodes if you want more engaging discussion about the Halo universe. This was recorded shortly after the release of the video, so you will hear some mention of Season 1 of the Halo show releasing last year, and some inaccuracies about things that were later introduced in the Halo Encyclopedia. So please forgive any elements of the conversation that are now out of date. But without further ado, please enjoy the Forward Unto Dawn podcast, episode 52.
Hello and welcome to the Forward Unto Dawn podcast, the show about the lore and universe of the Halo franchise. This is episode number 52. I'm David, and I'm joined by my usual co-host, Danny.
Hi, Lee Hillway.
And we've got a few guests this week who I'll let introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'm Isaac. You guys might know me if you've been following Forward Unto Dawn for a long time. Used to write for the website back in the day. But I have since moved on to doing an original YouTube channel, and I just released a big hybrid documentary video essay on the Halo universe.
Hi, I'm Stephen Loftus. Big time follower of Halo since it was a youngin'. Written many tech articles and assisted 343 Industries with 5 reference books, and provided a little bit of info for Isaac's latest video.
Hey, I am Wilson Van Ness. I had a personal connection with Isaac, but I am a designer and animator, so he brought me in to do some cool 3D animation and visuals for the Road to Halo video.
Yeah, so I guess Isaac, explain. We'll put a link in the show notes so people can see this themselves, but explain what we're talking about.
Yeah, so if you've ever seen Halo Legends, it covers a lot of human history, including World War II, moving up through the Information Age, and then pressing on into the Halo timeline stuff. And I basically took that and expanded it into a full hour-long documentary, using every possible source I could imagine from, official Halo material to tell the story of humanity's progression through the centuries and how warfare has kind of escalated in that time up to the present day, and then how it continues to escalate up to the 26th century. So it starts with ancient Sparta, and then we conclude with the inception of the Spartan program. Starting with the quote from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, I just really wanted to kind of give this a particular perspective to show that even though we're going to be highlighting a lot of military stuff, this is not necessarily an endorsement of military action. In fact, quite the opposite. Perhaps no culture embodied the military mindset of humanity more than the city-state of Sparta. Its full-class male citizens, the Spartans, were taken from their families at the age of 6 or 7. Right off the bat, we have the highlight of ancient Sparta, and David put together this great map, which is a visual that's going to continue through the video. But he did just a fantastic job of putting this all together and making it look technical but grounded in the Halo universe. And that was a really important thing, because I was using so much footage from other sources that early on in editing, I had a lot of concern that the first part of the video wasn't going to feel Halo enough. So having these graphics kind of interspersed throughout grounds it in that perspective and gives you that sort of futuristic Halo vibe, even though we're talking about, classical antiquity.
Was there anything that came up that you particularly wanted to cover or that you didn't think people would know about and how that related to the Halo universe?
So I really started with the Halo timeline, got a lot of help from Halopedia, and I literally just, clicked through the dates, found stuff in there that had been mentioned in the fiction, and then did my Wikipedia dive and pulled out stuff that felt like it was going to be relative to the narrative I was trying to tell. Starting with ancient Sparta is obvious because obviously we're building up to the Spartan program. So when you get to the Spartan 2s, you have to introduce the Spartan Zeros, Spartan 1.0s, even though I guess those are the Orions. So this was the best place to start the narrative because it allows you to it allowed me to pinpoint that military mindset that I was kind of emphasizing and showing the progression of. So you start at this point, and my hope was that as the video goes along, you get this sense of constant escalation. So we've got prehistory, ancient Greece, they're fighting with, shields, spears, arrows. And as the video progresses, you're going to see it escalate one small step at a time. So finding the points in the narrative that allowed me to showcase, okay, so much time has passed and we've now reached this stage in human warfare. How is it relevant to the Halo fiction? How can I set up things that I want to talk about in future videos? There's some stuff that it gets brought up and then there's no parallel to it later in the video. A lot of this is based on kind of having real history reflected in the Halo history, which I think is a big part of Eric Nyland's whole deal when he wrote The Fall of Reach and built a lot of this world. Very deliberate on his part. So I've tried to highlight that without making it too obvious. I hope that the audience will kind of pick up on it themselves. But yeah, there are some things that are not echoed later in the video that I have to set up for things that are further down the road later in this series when I do more Road to Halo.
You mentioned that David helped you out here with the maps for this particular part, and later on in the video, how did that actually come about?
David and I have actually been working on off screen for a while. He's done the opening animations for my video and little pieces from videos we did prior to this. So I know that he's easy to work with. He gets stuff done.
I'm a diva.
Yes. He honestly brings parts of my videos to life in a way that I don't have the capability to do. So by the time I was finished with my editing, there were massive gaps in the timeline that were absolutely relying on David's contributions to tie it together and make this a unified piece. So I know we've worked well together in the past. We continue to work well together. So David's someone that I always reach out to. And obviously you can see the quality of the work, no regrets whatsoever.
So it's a fun little idea of having it. I did a little frame based on the Halo Wars interface and that stuff, all the Halo. Or actually, I guess it's not really the Halo Wars. Back in the olden days, there was someone when you could theme your Mac. It had a program called Shapeshifter, and one of the themes was called ELO, and it was designed. It turned your Mac into kind of the look of Halo C's menu system, so a bunch of bright blues and dark blues and then reds for an accent, and I've used that for Forward Unto Dawn's color scheme, and so I just stole it and used it again here. But yeah, it's got you've got the whole kind of briefing feel going through it, and it kind of ties into I think about the Halo: The Fall of Reach, especially the animated show. They have the AIs giving the Spartans the lesson. It kind of ties into that, I think, and some nice little touch.
That's interesting that you said that Mac had a Halo-like theme. I had no idea. I've never used Macs. I had no idea that was ever a thing. Never mind the fact that you cribbed from it. I did not know.
Yes, I've stolen it all.
It's very reminiscent of graphics I've made for just on my own use for Halo 1 and 2. The interface looks very much like UNSC Starship Scream.
I'll put a link in the show notes so people know what this is too. But that was, yeah, like if you know what Mac looked like, that totally different. So yeah, I did the, and I guess we'll talk more about some of the graphics later on. Wilson, do you want to talk about sort of what you were? Because I was doing, I guess my stuff was all sort of 2D, not as sexy. But you want to talk about your contributions?
Yeah, the sexy 3 dimensions. Yeah, so David did all the 2D visuals. I did all the 3D visuals. I fell into it backwards because I wanted to get into doing some more photo and video stuff like right when COVID started. So then I switched all that effort to learning Blender and doing some animation stuff. And so when Isaac had a couple of jobs that popped up that needed some pretty specific 3D visuals kind of conceptualized and created, I jumped on it because that sounds, super fun to me to take very obscure concepts like a slip space drive or anything else like that and create something, to show it hopefully in a pretty easy, visually digestible way. So I love challenges like that, and I love Blender, and I love animation, so this was super fun to work on.
I should probably also point out that Wilson worked with me on the first World Showcase I did, which was about Dune. And we did a really similar sequence to the slip space drive sequence from this one, but it was for the Holtzman engine within that fiction. And we actually went into the Dune encyclopedia, pulled out descriptions of the Holtzman engine, and I think we found like illustrations that someone else had done, but Wilson did the first ever like 3D model showcasing the functionality of the Holtzman engine within Dune's universe, which was really cool. So obviously when it came to the slip space engine and then everything else that followed, I realized that he was going to be a really good fit for that.
Yeah, my recollection is that for a lot of this, you were sort of asking your Discord about like, do people remember things that where this happens, or like there's this imagery to sort of fill in these gaps, right?
Yeah, so used a lot of footage from 300 because it's some of the most iconic footage of Spartans in ancient Sparta. I mean, I like to include stuff that's outside my frame of reference because if it's all sources that I know, then the video's not going to have as diverse a visual feel, which is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I felt a little iffy about doing so much footage from 300, but it really has the best visual fidelity. If you strip out all the fantasy stuff, a lot of it is actually still pretty accurate. And in Halo Legends, when they show the Spartans, the visuals were based pretty heavily on 300, so it matches up with that footage when I slot it in. Try to incorporate a lot of classic paintings and artwork. I don't know, just to give it more of an intellectual feel, make it not all sci-fi Halo.
That's part of its beauty, though. It ends up kind of legitimizing Halo's fiction as being like, this could be potentially real because all the first half of the video is real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, although it kind of like that, because as you mentioned, 300 is like in some ways very faithful, but also it's totally ahistorical and stuff. But at the same time, that's kind of what it's the same attitude that led to them naming the Spartans in the first place in the Halo universe. So it is kind of, it's wrong, but it's accurate at the same time to Halo.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of fun thing to think about.
I just love how much the 300 footage matches up to the official Halo footage too.
I did think about that. Like I totally forgotten until watching this how much Origins actually had thrown in there.
Yeah.
I just really remember the sort of the end stuff because it's 2 parts. I guess I really had only remembered the second part.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it really was the basis for this whole video is the perspective that they brought to the Halo universe through Origins.
And I guess, like you were saying, the timeline stuff, a lot of what you talk about, especially in the middle section, is all things that, at best, it was sort of a... I don't know if they ever like really talked about it. I guess it's something they just overwrote when they needed to, but mostly it's stuck is the timeline that I guess Nyland and the franchise team put together. They put a Xbox.com timeline of Halo events before the game came out or around the time. and that's really the only detail we have for a lot of the stuff. It has not been touched otherwise.
Which is a real shame, because another intention behind creating this video was to showcase just how much of the Halo universe has real potential for future storytelling if they're, if the franchise writers are willing to kind of jump around in the timeline a bit more. But each warrior who raised their sword and issued a battle cry would inspire 10 more in their place. Humankind marched on, adding new inventions and ideas to their arsenal. So we get to the end of the Spartan segment, and then we start zooming forward through time. I love that effect of just kind of feeling like, okay, we've reached the end of this part of the story. Now we're going to zoom forward through time for a little bit and then pause, hit play, watch something unfold, get the relevance to the narrative, and then zoom forward again, pause, play. It's just a cool effect. Alexander the Great, not mentioned a lot in Halo fiction, except I believe in Halsey's journal, where she talks about how the Spartan 2s basically were all Alexander the Greats of their time. And then someone actually recently commented on the post and was talking about how Halsey's role in her era of the Halo universe makes her the Alexander the Great of her time. There's just some cool parallels. A lot of this video is, I made this video for Halo fans and for non-Halo fans. So when Halo fans are watching through it, they might be going, oh, okay, Alexander, I remember he's mentioned in Halsey's journal. And if someone who's not familiar with Halo is watching this, this is just a history lesson to them. Like, there's no connections to future timeline stuff, but it plants that seed so that when it comes up later in the video, they can see how Halo is really built on this. I like to call it echoes. Like in Halo Infinite, when you're finding the echoes of Cortana after she self-destructs. Halo does this thing where it constantly has the past kind of informing its future. And you just get these little hints at how the culture of the 26th century is so informed by military history throughout the centuries. So I've tried to emphasize that in the video.
Another parallel too is the Reach has a city called New Alexandria, which would be named after Egypt's Alexandria, which was founded by Alexander the Great.
Yeah. There's little connections throughout the whole thing, and you can pull out some big ones, but then there's still little ones that'll continue to sneak by, and you'll catch them later. So it's part of the fun of Halo, honestly, is there's these references to historical stuff, and if you don't know about it, that's kind of your entry point to learn about real history. One of the things I love about Halo fiction.
Yeah, I think a good one there for me would have been Corbulo and Axios. Before the live action series came out, I had never heard of him before.
Yeah, same. So one of the cool things about this project is that I started working on it a long time ago. It took me a long time to put this together. And over the course of editing it, official Halo content was released that kind of changed my approach to specific sequences. So when I had first started the project, I think I had finished the script, or I was had started the script or something. And then the Forever We Fight trailer came out. Back in 2021. I think I was finishing up my Dune video and getting ready to start this one. But it took kind of that Halo Legends perspective and did the Halo 3 Believe approach of doing live action, showing the Halo universe as more of a documentary or historical documentary. And it gave me so many cool segments to kind of intersperse throughout this video. And there's sequences in this video that would not be what they are if that trailer hadn't come out. It's really one of my favorite things that we've seen from Halo in live action. At this point, the global industrial revolution enters the picture. Immigrants from Britain, seeking entrepreneurial opportunities in the fledgling American nation, brought the Industrial Revolution with them overseas, and American business competition with the rest of the world began in earnest. David, I don't know if you want to talk at all about the process of making these animations. I don't know what little tidbits you have to share from your end.
I don't know, the Wikipedia is definitely your friend, because that's where I got you get all the the vector maps or whatever. So I just used those. I just had to modify them on occasion to show things. But
There were some that I requested kind of last minute, I think, too. So we're like this one of the ships coming over from Britain. I think was a later edition. Was it difficult for you to do these last minute, or had your production process made it easier?
No, I'm terrible at actually producing stuff in an effective way. So when we talk about stuff later, those ones were difficult to make changes, but these were pretty straightforward. Yeah, like we went through a bunch of iterations on design, but there wasn't major changes in terms of the look. Like we changed the font and a couple tweak things, but nothing major. I think actually the ship thing I used from something else too. The little ship icons I had from something else. Steal from yourself wherever possible.
So we've entered into the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, I liked you stealing the Master Chief Collection loading screen or whatever briefly for just a
I'm
bunch
glad
of
you noticed
ammo.
that one.
Yeah,
I was searching for shots of like, you know, bullets, shell casings, and then I happened to download the backgrounds for the Master Chief Collection. I was like, oh, there it is already. No need to keep searching. I particularly love this sequence of the American Civil War. Most of the footage is from Gettysburg, which was part drama and part historical reenactment. I think a lot of the people that you see in the movie were people that participate in those regular historical reenactments. But what some people might not realize as they're watching the video is that most of the audio was edited by me. I didn't record most of it, but I sourced it all and then spliced it together so that it kind of emphasized all of the footage that you're seeing, and made it feel more boots in the mud, grounded, like you're there hearing the battle taking place. Some people might assume that all of that audio came from the movies I pulled from. That's not the case. I downloaded them separately and then cut them in as needed. And I'm really proud of the results. I'm really happy with these. It would come to be regarded as the first large-scale conflict fed by the Industrial Revolution, as well as the first conflict to deploy rapid-fire Gatling guns. Then we get into the Great Wars, starting with World War I, moving into World War II. Yeah, this is when we see the first deployment of tanks, machine guns, a lot of kind of record-setting military occurrences that would develop into this 26th century Halo stuff.
yeah, and that's a nice touch because later on you get to the
Friedens.
yeah, I would love to pick whoever's brain at Microsoft or Nyland who came up with some of the timeline entries, because it did feel like, all right, like what World War III, like what if it's just like neo Nazis and like commies and stuff, but in space. And they probably weren't thinking much beyond that, but it's an interesting wrinkle that it ties sort of to the past and future stuff.
Yeah. And it also grounds the perspective of when the timeline was created. I think people were doing a lot of reflecting on World War II at the end of the 20th century. Saving Private Ryan had come out. It was on people's minds. But yeah, the fact that basically the UNSC and a lot of what came from the formation of the UNSC was a result of space Nazis versus space communists. Something not a lot of people know about the Halo fiction. I did really want to put a sequence on the Bolsheviks in World War I into here, but it was very difficult to tie it into the narration. But I think the Bolsheviks, based on their name, had a lot of influence on the Kosleviks.
Yeah.
Also, another aspect you kind of nailed on the head was having like corporations essentially being autonomous unto themselves and having a lot of leeway over employees and whatnot. We see it now, and they projected that before it started to really kind of hit here.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is when I was first getting into Halo, that was like definitely some far future sci-fi stuff, and now you look around the world and it's like, oh, that came a lot sooner than we were expecting. One of the things I love about Halo, and one of the things that drew me to it in the first place, was how seemingly accurate a lot of its predictions were at the time, and since then, even more so. So many of them have ended up coming true, which is something we'll talk about for later sequences in the video. But when I was younger, the science fiction that drew me in was the science fiction that was predictive, that was interested in saying what is most likely to happen in the future. And even from a young age, I recognized that Halo was one that kind of hit the nail on the head with a lot of topics that it explored. It was the first war to see the deployment of paratrooper aerial drop troops, setting the model for conflicts hundreds of years in the future. The formation of the world's first Special Forces brigades, and the first deployment of long-range ballistic missiles. And then throughout the video, you can see moments where I've tried to just remind the viewer, like, don't worry, there's a lot of historical stuff, but this is still a Halo video. Here's how it connects. I think there's about 2 points where I say this is relevant to Halo because of this, just through like a little, clip of the ODST drop pods over the paratroopers from World War II. We get to the founding of the United Nations, really important for Halo's timeline, obviously, because much of it functions under the United Nations Space Command. So you can't tell the story of Halo without explaining the United Nations, and you can't explain the United Nations without explaining World War II. Not to mention a lot of Halo's conflicts, a lot of the weapons, a lot of the vehicles, even some of the enemy vehicles and weapons are based on designs, real-world designs from World War II.
With the United Nations, you also get the fun thing that they've done a couple times where news organizations search for United Nations stuff and they put Halo on the screen instead.
Amnesty International has accused the United Nations of failing to show leadership to match the courage of protesters in Syria over the past year. In its annual report, Amnesty says the UN Security Council has been exposed as...
I love it.
Love it, yeah.
Classic.
Then we get into the Cold War, the space race, which is obviously when humanity first ventured beyond the Earth. So pretty important to Halo's story. Building off of that theme that was set up from the Sun Tzu quote at the very beginning of the video, it was really important to me to include Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech. This was the speech where the term military-industrial complex was first coined, or at least first used publicly. So I scrubbed through the whole thing, tried to find a good little clip to use here, just to remind people that while we're watching things escalate, this narrative is not an endorsement of military action and military aggression. Then with the founding of the International Space Station, we enter the information age. Skip forward a few years there. Stuff that wasn't relevant to the Halo timeline. By the end of the century, Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts would conduct joint research aboard the International Space Station, signaling the end of the Cold War and ushering in another period of prosperity akin to that of many countries following World War II. Humankind's technological might expanded exponentially. The internet was introduced to the public in 1991. This is really interesting to me because we're in the 90s now, which is the decade when I was alive, and when Halo was first kind of being conceptualized. So a lot of this stuff now is overlapping with real-world history of the developers when they were coming up with Halo. This is the stuff that was occurring around them as Halo was being conceived. We get the discovery of Reach, a real star, real exoplanets, and then things go south. And the exploration of space is not as emphasized as it was during the space race, and we get back into a big war period here with the War on Terror, which again was ongoing while Bungie was developing Halo, was coming up with the fiction of Halo. So it influenced a lot of what made it into this universe.
Yeah, famously, the Arbiter was Dervish, and they got so far before someone decided that it started coming off as too much of a War on Terror analog. that they changed the name.
Yeah.
The game file.
Apparently some manual, that's the thing that came out with the Vice history. They said that was so late that even some manuals had already been
really?
printed with the wrong.
That's interesting. It's really fascinating to me because we're coming out of this period of American warfare. And when you're in the middle of history, there's not a lot of examination of it. And it's only after things have happened that people start to reflect back on it. So looking back on the War on Terror, now that it's, I guess, officially come to a close or entered its next phase or whatever you want to call it, you can kind of see how this perspective that everyone was operating under at this time was informing the fiction that was being created. And other stuff like Battlestar Galactica, Firefly, all heavily influenced by this mentality. As 2004 rolls around in the video, we get to the first real fictional thing, which is the Castaway theory, which I believe was part of the IRIS campaign. When the date 2004 hits, I just put a little nod to I Love Bees with the tiny bee that flies across the lower right corner. Had to do it. But this is where in the Halo timeline, scientists start looking back at human history, examining our genetics, and finding that things are not quite what we thought they were. Including a video of, I guess, what wasn't called at the time, but what would be called a flash mob, of basically people acting like protesters or conspiracy theorists, but with Halo iconography on the signs. Like, that actually happened in Times Square.
This particular symbol was recently found in Africa, etched on a stone. We believe the ancients left it. We don't know for sure, but we've adopted it as part of our message and trying to spread more about the ancients.
I did not, because I Love Bees gets all the attention because it was like basically like the second or third really successful ARG. And then I think Iris kind of gets forgotten. Yeah. Except when someone brings it up to talk about whether or not Bungie intended humans to be Forerunners or not. So this, I had no idea that they had actually done this stuff in real life.
Yeah, I never heard about it when it happened. I had to find out about it later. As I was editing, I got through all the historical stuff. I got to the point in the Halo timeline where artificial intelligence got introduced, which there's not a lot of details on. Really, they just say that the first true AI came out in sometime in the mid 21st century. And that's about all we have. But as I was editing through this sequence, all of the stuff with OpenAI, ChatGPT was starting to blow up in the news and get really big. So I actually had to go back and recut most of this sequence to include real-world developments in artificial intelligence. It was a wild moment. As a Halo fan, as a sci-fi fan, as a citizen of Earth, watching these things just progress. The fact that it happened to all be developing as I was editing this sequence on artificial intelligence in a Halo video was just wild. And then I found Blake Lemoine's interview with Lambda. We don't know much about the actual early dialogues between artificial intelligence and humanity in the Halo universe. So I had some just like vague dialogue there, kind of giving a brief overview of how that developed and what happened. But then I found that conversation between Blake Lemoine and Lambda, and I just took a risk and said, you know what, I'm going to use that. And I think the fact that this sequence on artificial intelligence, which is so sci-fi sounding, has that much overlap with real world stuff, makes this segment hit that much harder in a way I never could have planned.
It's also kind of funny just because that's like a kind of an example of Halo getting lucky in the way that like the Star Trek franchise set time, like what was at the time 30 or 40 years ahead in the future, and it quickly got lapped, and now they've been constantly trying to pretend like the future is still related to our present to diminishing success. And it's kind of funny that Halo kind of lucked out and avoiding that thus far.
I also think it speaks volumes to how carefully they chose when things would happen in the timeline. I remember there was a discussion years and years ago, an interview, something, where one of the writers from Bungie talked about why they had chosen the 26th century. And it was basically just, we needed to set it so far in the future that nobody who was playing the games would see that time and say, oh, look, they got all of this wrong. But then, yeah, like you said, so much stuff preceding it, building up to the 26th century, was still, I don't know if it was just luck or if they chose very carefully based on what they thought might happen, but so much of the Halo timeline seems to still, to this day, line up with reality.
Keep in mind, too, though, that to Bungie, number 7 was a very significant thing, right? And most of the Halo fiction, in Bungie's time, takes place in 2552, which is 2-5 equals 7 and 5-2 it equals 7. And that the Covenant were first found by humanity in 2525, which is, again, is 7 to 7.
Yeah. And didn't that, they didn't plan that originally, and then people started digging it up, and they said, now we're going to make it as intentional as possible.
In essence, the human brain became a seed from which a much larger, more complex and brilliant mind was grown. The catch was that, because of the scanning power required to completely map a human mind, down to the last dendrite, an electrical surge had to be sent through the entire brain, effectively frying it. AIs, then, could only be created from the donor brains of already deceased individuals.
Yeah, so we get through the artificial intelligence of today, starting to overlap with the development of artificial intelligence in the Halo universe. And then the real hard pivot point, I think, is where we get cognitive impression modeling technology and then the nano-assembled crystal data storage.
Which is all the super cool Wilson stuff.
Yeah. Yep. So we go from present day AI, presumably going to more advanced ones, and now we transition into smart AIs.
What did you use for a reference for all this?
This one specifically, we got kind of lucky with, I had actually done a first draft of this that was, almost identical to this shot. And then Isaac found that other visual showing the brain scan and it kind of disintegrating into these orange sparks and particles. So that one was kind of, backwards lucky. Not a lot of specific things other than like the general look early on. We kind of picked to just say, kind of to make things easier, but also to make things cohesive, is everything should get that glowing cyan hologram, halo vibe scheme. So that just, translated into more of these hologram HUD type visuals, and, you can tell that color scheme throughout. That's a pretty good indicator of what was ended up being custom stuff for this video, is when we got that bright glowing cyan going on. But this stuff, you'll have to remind me, Isaac, of who modeled that for us, but we found another artist to actually model that table, and he killed it.
Yeah, so we started with the CIM machine from Halsey's Journal, which is obviously a 2D sketch. And then we found a Halo community member who does custom models. Yeah, we had a Halo community member throw it together and take something that originally was 2D and make this awesome 3D model that Wilson was able to use. And then like he said, we go through iterations as we're getting towards the final visuals that we want to include in the public release. And I had always imagined the brain scan as being more like the brain just got electrically charged to the point where it kind of lost all of its liquid and just became this charred lump. And in the process, they were mapping the pathways, but it was so powerful of an electrical charge that they send through the brain that it literally just like cooks it. And then Wilson shot me this visual where it scans and kind of like disintegrates the brain front to back. And it was really cool because Halo the series, which came out, season 1 was last year, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Halo the series, which came out last year, actually gave us visuals for a lot of stuff in the Halo universe that we hadn't seen before. And the way that it showed a cognitive impression modeling scan functioning was not what I had pictured, but without any communication between Wilson and I, it ended up being exactly what he rendered. So it was kind of a cool little accidental parallel. And then, of course, I ended up using that shot from the show in the video.
Honestly, all these shots throughout this whole thing, there were lots of sequences we needed to do, but each of those sequences, of course, consist of anywhere from 1 to 2 to 5 to 6 to 7 shots each. So each jump of the camera was kind of a new mini project to take on, and I was learning how to do something new at almost every stage. So I love how everything came out, because everything was a huge learning process to get something of this fidelity out. But I love the way especially this visual right here, came out.
And we referenced Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn and a lot of AI visuals for this orb, which was something I hadn't originally planned on showing in the video when I wrote the script. But over the course of iterating back and forth, we came to the realization that this would be a cool visual to show at this point. It's so simple, but it looks so perfect. Like that is a Halo AI, according to the visual motifs that we've seen before. You did such a fantastic job of rendering that.
Humanity, always looking outward into the cosmos for signs of other intelligence, had given birth to its own strange new form of life, and immediately shackled it and held a gun to its head.
This is where I start using some machinima shot within the Halo games sort of documentary style. Tried to insert it real subtle so that you almost don't notice that you're starting to see Halo stuff. Obviously, people who've played the games a lot will recognize it, but as we transition from real history to Halo history, I wanted the visuals to also go from real footage to video game footage. So starting with some really simple shots there.
Yeah, with the standoff towers.
Yep. Which is great, because in the description for that map, they even say these satellites once monitored the stars for signs from other intelligence, but are now repurposed for war, something like that. So it even fits within the fiction in a way that some of the machinima sequences don't quite later on. I love this bit of describing how rampancy works with the growth of neural pathways in a smart AI. I pulled a lot of the nuclear atomic warfare footage from the Atomic Cafe, which is just a wonderful documentary. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. It's not very long. It highlights the kind of the irony of the atomic age and how it juxtaposes propaganda that was coming out at the time for the American public about how safe nuclear technology was, with real footage and real tests that they did behind the scenes showing how destructive it was. But this sequence is actually someone illustrating how a atomic reaction propagates. But the visual was so perfect for artificial intelligence, I just decided to use it 1-to-1. So you're looking at the function of an atomic bomb there, including the destructive stuff the footage is showing in the background of the illustration. But it matches up perfectly with the risks of artificial intelligence and their rampancy.
They have such a branching tree kind of look in Halsey's journal.
Yep, and we actually use that as a reference as well behind the scenes. And then as things move forward and get more sci-fi, we get towards the end of the 21st century. We start seeing the effects of overpopulation. I was able to use some of the footage from Forever We Fight, which shows a Falcon-like rescue craft being used. I think within the fiction, that would probably show up much later in the timeline. But what it's showing of these people kind of drowning.
I don't know. It's the Halo universe says people are still running around with ballistic weapons 500 years in the future.
It fits. I think technically people on Halopedia might be like, well, that should show up later, but it just fit the emotional tone of this sequence so well, I had to put it in there.
Yeah, and aside from, I guess, the stuff you see in Mythos, there's pretty much nothing about what the aesthetic of the Halo universe at that time is.
Yeah, the cool thing is that
the one shot we get in, or the one visual we get in Mythos of the Interplanetary War, seems like it was heavily influenced by the aesthetic of Battlestar Galactica and a lot of the sci-fi that was coming out at that time. So incorporating that shot with footage from Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, even some stuff from Captain America, it blended so seamlessly. And I really am a big fan of the look that they've established for this era in the Halo story.
But the fighting did not end. 2 years later, a series of bombings in London and South America kicked off 19 months of the worst conflicts humanity had seen on terrestrial soil since the close of the 21st century. What came to be known as the Rainforest Wars.
So we move into some other conflicts in the Halo universe that have not been really fleshed out. I think each of the conflicts we talk about here is taken from basically one or two sentences in various books. So World War III, not technically named World War III in official Halo material, but we have mentions of more world wars after World War II and a second American Civil War. This is all stuff that's you can find in the books, at least in small mentions. So I had to use that to build out this era of the video. We get the creation of the drop jet platoon, which would ultimately become the ODSTs. But that gave me a nice way to do a visual parallel with Starship Troopers, which obviously was a huge influence on the aesthetic and the narrative of Halo. A lot of Halo fans want more spin-off games, and if they chose to go further back in time, they could establish whole new aesthetics, take a totally different art direction that still kind of nods to the 26th century stuff. It could be really cool.
The Unified Earth Government, formally called into being to funnel resources into colonization efforts, became the central governing body representing Earth and her colonies. To codify this new power, the Houses of Parliament, bombed during the Interplanetary War, were rebuilt into a new structure that would be the governing seat of the UEG.
So David, we've got this animation of just real simple, the locations of the space tethers, but we don't actually know the locations of a small number of these. So I'm curious how you chose the locations that you did to fill in the blanks.
Oh, I don't remember. I think it's something like, isn't there, maybe I just came up with it, but there's something about like orbital tethers. They need to be you would put them somewhere close to the equator, right?
Yeah. You would, yes.
So I think I just picked bigger cities along that rough route. I guess Havana must have been one that we already knew about because that one's sort of the odd man out.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think there's only two new ones, and that's on the west side of Africa and the one in India. I think those are the only two that we would.
Like Lagos and Mumbai. Like, all right, big cities. We'll go with that.
And then you get a nice even coverage across the whole planet too.
Yeah, that was the other thinking. You would assume it would be somewhat similar, spaced out, but.
I liked using this shot from Infinite of, within the fiction, within the canon, this is actually the Mombasa tether being rebuilt. But at this point, it's a perfect stand-in for building it for the first time. And then the way the shot kind of zooms in and lifts up over the smoke, it's almost like humanity is moving up and away from its terrestrial conflicts.
I literally did not know this out in the skybox before.
Yeah, it's not obvious. You kind of have to. It's on the map bazaar, but you have to kind of get up into the upper levels of the map if you can to kind of see it well, or just go into a theater.
It's a nice example of where the machinima tools allowed me to break out of the map and show stuff that you wouldn't be able to see just staying on the ground. I love this sequence from Legends of the frigate-like colony ships heading out. Mostly because the visual style looks a lot more like early NASA or early Expanse type ships. Just gives it a different aesthetic for this time period. One thing that hasn't been expanded on very much within the fiction, we know that colonization started in 2310 when they first started to send out ships equipped with new subspace drives. But then Reach
which has been claimed as the first colony, was founded much later. So I kind of took that opportunity to fill in the gaps and say, okay, well, these were technically colonies, but they were not habitable colonies. This is where a lot of the early technological development and corporation expansion took place.
Well, also like materials acquisition for the actual colonization effort.
Yes. Yep. So it has a darker, less flattering tone than later colonization efforts. And I just think it's cool that that part of the fiction hasn't been expanded very much. So I took the opportunity here.
I think 2310 is also the first we hear of the AI group that was kind of clandestinely leading humanity along over the years.
Yeah, so when I was writing the script, I did consider putting the assembly in, but because most of their actions were so covert and happening under the radar, I think I'm going to do a future video where I kind of go back and almost like they do in shows and movies where like people time travel and then re-encounter events from earlier seasons or movies. I'm going to do the same thing with this video and then kind of insert the assembly into it. I think that should be fun.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, I also like that when talking about piracy, I had the opportunity to use some footage of ships, like Soren's ship from the Halo series. Just a nice stand-in.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like based on the Halo 5. I think they're the Brahmins.
Yeah, which I put a little shot from Nightfall in there as well. Didn't use a lot of footage from Nightfall, but that one of the people investigating the ship was a nice one to throw in. And then I think when we get to this part of the video where the Warthog is invented and introduced to humanity, this is like the hard pivot point where like from this point on in the video, it's all Halo fiction. It's all Halo sources. It's almost like it's broken into 3 sections. We get the historical segment, and then we get the transition into science fiction stuff, starting with artificial intelligence. And then from this point on in the video, it's all Halo aesthetic.
And yet it still jumps between live action, animation, and gameplay, right? It's just still nice. It unifies the whole video.
Yep. But then also, as I mentioned earlier, transitioning slowly more and more into straight video game footage as much as possible. The Ross Ziegler blip was an important thing for me to include because obviously the Halo event is a big deal within the fiction. Just kind of wanted to set it up, do a little bit of foreshadowing here, just like I did with the colonization of Illuvion and the discovery of Forerunner relics by Hannibal, even though he didn't release it to the public. Just those little hints that, like, don't worry, aliens are coming. I think the Ross Ziegler blip is also the first time that we kind of get confirmation that there were colonies before Reach. Because they mentioned it was discovered on Earth, but that they cross-referenced data from the colony worlds. But since this was before the founding of Reach, that obviously means there had to be colonies that were, I guess, in a different class.
Not necessarily colonies, but maybe like prospecting for colonies. So there's like a scientific group there, but nobody staying for too long. Just do a survey. Can we terraform? Yes, no, and then.
Yeah,
right.
I also assumed that, like, because they once again had that 800 number from the timeline, like the 800. It was not just like actual like Reach like worlds. That's somewhere they're counting like mining thing, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, like population 5, entire planet.
Yeah. We'll set up a corporate station, do our research, and that's it.
We'll stay long enough to set up a bunch of automated robotic machinery, and then we'll leave and collect our stuff later on.
Yep. Which also transitions to this graphic nicely, where David shows a lot of the known near-Earth star systems juxtaposed with Epsilon Eridani, which I originally mispronounced, and Stephen was kind enough to correct before I released the video.
But they call it Eridani in the thing, don't they?
Eridani is used in The Babysitter.
I feel like it was in Contact Harvest too.
I think he says Aridnus. He's talking about Aridnus, and he says it's the something this side of Aridnus.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why I mispronounced Eridani as Aridni originally.
Epsilon Eridani.
Yeah, but this graphic is really nice because as we're transitioning into the pure Halo stuff, it lets you see where Reach is relative to actual known systems. And then this whole segment on just the overview of the Eridani system and the colonization of Reach. David did a great job with this one. Love it.
Eridani featured 4 habitable planets that already possessed rich and thriving ecosystems, requiring minimal terraforming effort. Of these planets, the largest was chosen as the site of humanity's first true extrasolar colony. Rich in titanium deposits, this so-called super-Earth would then be used as a hub for spaceship manufacturing, a launch point to the story. And then it allowed me to utilize the opening sequence from Halo Reach as sort of our introduction to the planet within this video.
Almost in its
so well.
Almost in its entirety. It was
good. It just had the same emotional weight that I wanted this segment to have, and it had that sense of like revealing the planet for the first time. So for the purposes of this video's audiences, it just worked so well. We also talk about the Odyssey launching along with the Phoenix class vessels. That was difficult for me to say in the narration too. But we have one shot of the Odyssey from Mythos, and we haven't seen it otherwise. So I used some close-ups from Alien of the underside of one of the ships, which has that same, technical metal plating feel, and juxtaposed some creaking metal sounds that were used in the first Halo game, I believe. I think like in the opening sequence, first cutscene. I don't know if people will catch that in the video, but it was a nice way of taking that alien shot and then by tying it with the other footage, making it feel much more Halo, like you're looking at the Odyssey launching. Now we're starting to move out into David's animations. These ones, but this is the visual style that you established with this particular segment that gets used throughout the rest of the video as we go into interstellar space. And we see at this point in the narrative, the UNSC has gotten so powerful it controls all of Earth's solar system. The entire system is under one military rule. That's an important part of the narrative to me.
Yeah, and you use a fake CMA logo or that we didn't have for this, right? It's like I saw that there was some talk that like the Sins of the Empire people kind of came up with a similar look, which is a funny little bit of parallel. Everyone sort of agreed on this is what the CMA thing should look like.
Yeah, so we had the Colonial Administration Authority. They've got a logo that's been established, but the Colonial Military Authority had no such logo. There's a void there within the fiction in terms of visual representation. So, being friends with Stephen Loftus, I had to go to him as the expert in recreating iconography from corporations and logos from different things within the UNSC. He was the best choice, obviously, to create a new original CMA logo. And we had kind of a cool process in coming up with that visual design, which I'll let him talk about.
Yeah, it's not something that I didn't create it whole cloth. It's just an amalgamation of the outer CAA logo, and I was going to, when you asked me to do one, I was going to create something new, and what I was thinking of at first was, this is the military or the enforcement branch of the colonial government. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, like Wild West sort of thing. I'm thinking, okay, let's say like police badge. Let's play the sheriff's star. And as I started to do a few little pencil sketches, I had thought back to there's a really rare remote logo that's used in Halo 4 assets in the multiplayer computer. And I'm pretty sure no one really had ever seen it much outside of probably Bungie. Or I guess 343 at the time. but there's a really tiny symbol that looked more or less like a police shield with a star in the center of it and a few little wings off to the side. And I thought, well, what if I just place that in the center of the CAA's logo otherwise and just change the text? That's all I did. So no magic, just using what I knew to use.
Yeah.
Connecting the right dots.
And
Yeah.
so is that...
It'd be nice for that to end up canonized.
Well, we know you have the possibility of that. So was that how you came onto the project, Loftus?
Originally, it was for maps. I had an extensive map, a top-down galactic map, essentially, of all known Halo stars and their colonies. And then I just, as I went on with it, it was years in the making, I just started adding like real stars here and there just to kind of fill it out and make it look like a star map. So that's what Isaac first wanted, was the map. So I gave him a series of screenshots that assembled the map that I'd created, and then they used that to make the more thematic map style used in this video.
Yeah, and which I ended up using for a lot of the stuff, although I tweaked it a bit for the purposes of dramatic license, I guess.
Yep.
But I'm curious, like when you started building that map and how it's changed over the course of you developing it and stuff.
The only thing that's really changed, I guess, is that every time, 343 has been very reticent to pin down newer colonies to actual stars. They want to keep it a little more. They don't want to paint themselves in the corner, I guess. So very few new ones get added there, but the map started out small and just kept growing and growing. I think there's between 300 and 400 stars on the map now, all with actual locations that I've used from finding like galactic data online for like distances and relative angles to the center of the galaxy compared to us. So it's not a 3D map, it's just 2D as though you're looking down on it from above. So there's inaccuracies in 2D map of a 3D space, but it's as accurate as I think you can get 2D.
Well, and I think that's also a good point of like just the legacy of early building is that Halo is unique in that it does. I think Star Trek, like there are some planets that are supposed to have real world analogs, but Halo is fairly uncommon in that it uses real stars for certain things, but that also created weirdness when you started building out the universe. So that's where we got the slip space speed isn't directly correlated to physical distance and things like that. They sort of built in.
Yeah, it could have if they adapted it early on enough, but they kind of let it get out, like between them and Bungie, it kind of got out of control because no one was really in charge of it, I suppose. So it became kind of a mess, and that's how they had to clean it up.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up with the graphics when later on when they start talking about the colonies, is that Reach is described as the farthest flung, and like the actual star is not super far away at all. So you have to,
or with Harvest.
Yeah, sorry, Harvest.
Fortunately, that gave me and Steven a nice opportunity to do a little follow-up video, which I'm sure by the time this podcast releases, will actually be out in the public, and you can watch that. So we're doing a breakdown of Harvest's location and the discrepancy between the real star and its distance as an outer colony, and then how I chose to portray it in this video. So you can check that out. Link in the show notes. David, when you were building the map of human colonies, how much did Steven's map influence what you chose to portray?
I mean, like it's sort of part of the trick is that Steven's map is excellent and thorough, but it's also based on what we know, and there's plenty of stuff you bring up that we don't know. So I sort of had to cheese it on occasion, and then just for the purposes of there's the wider story that as we go through this section, that you start out with just a few colonies and a few worlds, and then it expands, and then it's a process of things falling apart and increasing chaos. Narratively, it made sense to shift some stuff around. Like aside from Onyx, Zeta Doradus is, I think I used for is sort of where Far Isle is, just because it made sense to have it sort of out in its own space. Yeah, so it's not as accurate as Loftus is. Very, very. That was the other thing, is that Loftus has a bajillion stars on it, and I found out rather quickly that dealing with 300 plus After Effects layers destroyed my computer. So there's some concessions to legibility and other considerations and rendering considerations versus being totally accurate.
That's great.
Plus for the nature of the documentary, you only want to highlight a few things of interest and not overwhelm the viewer.
The viewers aren't ready for a full Loftus. You need to like shield them, like have lead line goggles or whatever.
Yeah, it would be a very cluttered visual if we had gone and just shown every single colony. So obviously you have the colony count showing up on screen, which doesn't match up to what you're seeing in terms of the star systems, but because you see the number, the brain kind of connects the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
It was with the settling of Alluvion in 2412 that humankind had officially reached so far beyond the limits of Earth that its colonies had to be divided into two groups: inner colonies and outer colonies, with Alluvion coming to serve as a prominent way station between the two. What about the location of Alluvion? How did you pick that one?
Oh, that one's, I think, fake too. Yeah, I think I just picked something that was sort of like the border of the inner outer colonies is totally made up, because we don't have any source for that. So I just picked, all right, obviously we know these colonies are on this side of it. These colonies are on that side, based on the ones we know, and then sort of went around it.
Well, Alluvion had to be included as part of this setup for humanity's first contact scenario. That was another through line in the video, is like, as we keep exploring and colonizing planets, it's like, where are the aliens? Are there aliens? Maybe there's no aliens. We've colonized 800 outer colonies and we haven't seen anything. And then you get just these little hints like, oh, wait, something weird was going on that planet. Or, oh, we found something on this other planet, but they hushed it up.
You kind of do beforehand anyways, because when they're on Reach, right, there's the Guta, there's the Moa, there's, trees. Trees are aliens, right? They're not Earth trees, they are aliens.
Yeah, and that's one thing about Halo that's kind of unique in how they chose to portray that as aspect of scientific exploration, is like flora and fauna, native wildlife is kind of not a big deal. It's like we just find a bunch of crazy alien animals and plants and stuff on these planets, and yeah, that's it. That's what they are. They're just alien plants and animals. But the big deal...
They don't actually talk to us, yeah.
Right, the big deal is civilizations, somebody that we can converse with, that have their own society. Other science fiction, they would make a big deal out of the discovery of new biomes, but in Halo, it's just kind of like, yeah, they were there. So with the creation of the Translite Drive, the Shaw Fujikawa Translite Drive, again, I get this wonderful footage from the Forever We Fight trailer showing the first human test, basically, which was great to slot in there and give it a little bit more dramatic weight. If that trailer hadn't come out, that sequence probably wouldn't have hit the way it did. We live in the 4 dimensions of space-time, the first 3 being spatial dimensions, and the 4th being a temporal dimension, time, which we move through in one single direction and pace. What the Shaw Fujikawa Translite engine did was use particle accelerators to generate micro black holes to tear a hole from normal 4-dimensional space-time into an 11-dimensional space. But it's at this point in the video that we get into the sequences, the animations that made me want to reach out to Wilson, because he had done the Holtzman renders. Holtzman renders were vague in their own ways. Like, the technology has a pretty hard set functionality, but it gets more esoteric as it goes along. And Slipspace is kind of similar, but we had to highlight and explain different physics functions here, which was kind of a fun challenge to tackle. But I think Wilson should definitely talk about this sequence.
Mm-hmm. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff was crazy to think about originally. This took quite a few rounds to even get anywhere close to where it felt like we were actually communicating what we needed to. But this is pretty cool.
Let me ask this too. How much understanding did you, like, I know you've played the Halo games a while back. How much understanding of slip space drives did you have prior to this project?
Oh, very little. Yeah, it was, outside of basic understanding of like the idea of a wormhole or something like that, no, very little understanding to any specifics about the actual engine.
Cool, which probably helps with explaining the functionality and getting it really precise in these animations.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You want to start from a place of trying to figure out yourself. You got to be able to communicate it and, make yourself understand it first. One
thing I will point out is that when we show the slip space drive spinning up and then shooting out the particle, these animations came in towards the end of the project, so I had to kind of get sound effects in there very quickly. And when it comes to that aspect of creation, I kind of just trust my gut. First thought, best thought is kind of my philosophy. So when I was thinking about what a slip space engine should sound like, I actually ended up going to the Halo 5 plasma caster. So the sounds that you hear during this sequence are actually the plasma caster from Halo 5 charging up and then firing, but I altered its pitch so that it sounded more like a laser and a sci-fi engine device, and it worked so well. What Translite Engine did was use particle accelerators to generate micro black holes.
Yeah, it's nice that you used the frigate's engine there, slip space engine too.
Yeah, we wanted to do something that looked a little older, more like hard technology feel. Because later slip space drives, they're encased in like this outer shell. You don't really get to see what each part is doing. And that one just fit the bill so well. I know Wilson and I did a lot of back and forth on how to portray a ship moving through slip. Like, how do you show 11 dimensions? That was a particular challenge for us.
This final effect we kind of got lucky on, because after trying a few things, it honestly just kind of happened. I was trying to mess with, trying to drive different noise textures like through a tunnel, something like that. And this was kind of a mistake where I left something going way too fast. And I was like, oh shit, that actually has a really cool whipping, visceral, space altering effect.
Yeah. And I remember he submitted it to me and was like, what do you think about this? Is this too much? And I was like, no, you need to take that and amp it up to 11. That's like exactly what we want for slip space. This needs to seem violent and destructive and like chaotic. Matter is not meant to be there.
Yeah. Not very effective.
Instead, operation of this quantum field required the calculations of a smart AI. Time would often move chaotically in this domain. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show the progression of artificial intelligence, not just in terms of their capabilities, but their visual appearance. And this was one of those things that, like, towards the end of the project, I realized that I hadn't quite shown enough of the progression. So when we're talking about ships moving through slip space and how difficult the calculations were, this was the perfect time for us to slot in kind of an early AI hologram. Wilson, I don't know if you want to talk about our iteration process for the look of these AIs and how we animated it.
Sure, yeah. This one, like I said, was a pretty cool challenge to figure out, because I am by no means a character animator or anything like that. So this was really pushing me out of my comfort zone. But we found, some, thankfully, some models on some, free to use websites like Mixamo and stuff like that. So we were able to kind of junk it together. And I think the effect came out really cool. We obviously didn't dump a bunch of money into this. So this is like free models, free animations. Those animations on the screen are from like stock repositories. So this really was like a, use what we have, but make it look really sick in the end. So I love how this stuff came out. We kind of had the idea of doing some, some more fleshed out animation stuff, but I think this communicates what you were going for really well in terms of an early stage AI. Something a little not simple, but almost robotic if you think about it in the scheme of how advanced these things get.
Yeah, we had originally looked at animations of Isabel from Halo Wars 2 when you see sequences of her, doing her computer magic. It's all very dramatic, and you've got stuff whizzing by her in digital space. And we were kind of trying to go for an earlier, more rudimentary approach to that same aesthetic. And then picking the model for the AI was kind of fun too, because I think this is within the context of the video, this is the second smart AI that we've seen a visual for. And this is the first one where we get to have some of their more unique avatar selection come through. And because this video was so much about the history of war, we decided to do a Roman, I don't know if it's a Roman centurion, but a Roman era soldier, which is just a nice little way of putting our own echoes into the video like Halo does.
A doctorate in political science and sociology named Elias Carver applied mathematics to the problem of humanity's interstellar politics. By using the matrix mechanics of the vectors of human expansion and forecasting them into the future, Carver came to a startling conclusion. Human space had become so large that the limited governments maintaining it would be unable to prevent the complete breakdown of social order within 20 years.
I really like for when you're talking about Carver's findings, you've got like the sort of constellation thing going on. It's really cool. And it kind of ties in with the star maps earlier, and then Loftus's stuff.
Yeah, like Steven mentioned, the maps being 2D kind of loses some of the impact and reality of how spread out these colonies are. And it was really, really important to me at some point in this video that we actually showed the 3D representation of the colonies, so that people who don't spend a lot of time in the science fiction realm at least understand that the map they've been seeing was flattened. So this was just such a cool opportunity to actually show that map that was based on Steven's data expanded into 3 dimensions. We had talked a bit about the star map in Starfield, which came out recently, and kind of replicating that look. And it just worked so well for the Carver findings, because this is something that it showed up in the books, but we've never seen visuals for. So for me, like, I know a lot more work went into some of the earlier animations, but this one in particular is the one I'm probably most excited about, because it takes that concept of the Carver findings and really shows you visually what's going on in a way that no Halo fan has ever been able to see before. There's some cool stuff in it as well. Like, we have some of the really close colonies to Earth that are not quite candidates for habitation, but might have been good candidates for corporate work, research and development. They're highlighted in a different blue color, so you can see when the line heads out to Reach. That's when the actual colonization efforts start. And then you can see that a lot of different slip space pathways open up from Reach, demonstrating how much Reach is a sort of a hub for interstellar colonization.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure these really felt like that it was expanding logically, and actually how, it would have, not just a bunch of lines growing centered around Earth to Reach and then exploding everywhere.
And then there's also a cool visual parallel in the way artificial intelligence grows within a Riemann matrix. You get the central point, which is the map of the human neural network, that expands out into this much more complex structure. And I really wanted to emphasize, again, like, there's another echo there within the fiction, that Earth, in a way, if you're looking at all the colonies, Earth is that central seed of the human mind, expanding out and diversifying into this much more complex system, which is just kind of a motif you see throughout a lot of the books. But then being able to visualize that and actually show it to people was so exciting to me. Like,
This was honestly being able to work with Wilson and Stephen Loftus on this to show people something they hadn't seen before was one of the real privileges of this project.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the coolest things about it, is that it gives you, like, it's useful as a, I guess, educational tool, but even cooler is that it gives you, I think, considering you don't like hire a bunch of artists to like visualize stuff or anything like that, you give a real tangible sense of the Halo universe and the stuff we don't see. That's just backgrounded. And that's why people should watch the video.
A certain 14-year-old girl, obsessed with artificial intelligence, would watch the announcement with a particularly rapt attention. By her 15th birthday, Catherine Halsey would be working on her second doctoral thesis. And it was during this year that she attended an academic social mixer, where she bumped into Dr. Elias Carver.
I would love to talk about your Midjourney stuff. If you want to back it up a few minutes, talk about that whole thing. I thought this was a super cool way to tell kind of this vignette of the story. I think, this would be a really cool way to do some short form stories going forward. But I thought, if you're not using AI generation to do something tacky or rip someone off, this is a super cool and effective way to use it.
Yeah, so I'm friends with a lot of professional artists that are also Halo fans. And I did reach out to them to kind of illustrate some of these sequences. I really wanted them to bring their talent to illustrating a young Dr. Halsey. Also, the discovery of the Ross Ziegler blip. I wanted to do some illustrations of future paleontologists working with artificial intelligence, but unfortunately their schedules didn't align with the production of the video. They couldn't participate, so I kind of shrugged my shoulders. I said, I really wanted to get more artists involved in this, but hey, in a video that involves artificial intelligence so much, might as well use some artificial intelligence.
What machine learning or large language model stuff did you use for the computer generated sequences? Yeah,
it was all Midjourney all the way through, because that's just what I've played around with the most. It took a lot of iterating. I mean, anyone who's used Midjourney knows that it doesn't come out very precise. So you have to generate a lot of images and then find the ones that are closest and then kind of tweak those. But it was exciting to me just to kind of, I took some concept art and some images from the encyclopedias of Dr. Halsey and then told it to kind of like age reverse her and then place her into these scenarios. And some of the artwork that it spat out was like, this one in particular of Halsey kind of talking back to Carver at the social mixer. Other than the way the characters in the background were rendered, like that looks like it could be official Halo art. Like that looks like Dr. Halsey at that age in that scenario to me. So it came out so well.
Yeah, that's super well done.
And then at this point in the video, we see the Carver findings escalating as Dr. Halsey applies her intellect to the problem.
I guess you should say that it's because we're following it to the creation of the Spartans. That's sort of the finale of the thing, or I guess the crescendo of your video is Halsey and the Carver findings and this really cool graphic.
Yeah. I just, again, if you've read the books, you understand the scenario, but if someone's being introduced to this for the first time, this was an opportunity to show them just how extreme the political situation was within human space. So being able to show what might actually happen if all the human colonies get disconnected from each other and can't communicate, can't engage in trade, like what would happen to 800 plus human worlds if they were all isolated in space and couldn't engage in society with each other. So outside of reading that on the page, this visual that Wilson came up with, coupled with the music that I chose to overlay on it, I think it brings that emotional weight to it in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's super, it gets eerie, like at this shot and this next shot. It's very cool. I think the effect really lands in an emotional way.
Yeah, it's one of those things you go into the script, you write the script, and then you're thinking as you start editing, like, how the heck am I going to show this? And I never could have imagined that this visual was going to come out as good as it did. Like, it was beyond my wildest expectations. It hits so perfectly.
It's also, I think, one of the sequences we had the most ability to like really pay attention to the tone and, you know, kind of the emotion of it, because all these other ones were being very visual and trying to communicate, you know, complex ideas simply, but this one was a pretty simple but yet devastating idea. So this was cool. Like this last shot, if you notice, I kind of moved the camera around, and then this last one is much more of like a slow, you know, 70s horror movie pan out with, it's just steady. It pulls back really slowly, and it just has, you know, to me, it almost felt like a horror movie. The Carver findings map and then the Halsey maps are really kind of the, you know, byproduct of all of our work. That's the one thing we all kind of touched on, and, you know, it really is one of the most impactful things in the story. So it's pretty cool that when you look at those, yeah, no, those maps, the 3D versions of the maps were totally created off of your, you know, data, and then off of David's 2D maps. So that definitely was a cross-pollination of everyone on the team.
And with the sequence that we see on screen now too, it's neat that instead of going photoreal, you kind of kept it. It's 3D, but you kind of kept it within the confines of like the Halo 1 and 2 kind of graphical. It's you know, still got the blue tint to it, and it's more of a schematic of what has happened, not like a visual record.
Yep, it's one of those things where what do they say? Constraint breeds creativity. Limitations breed creativity. Something like that. Yeah.
Or less is more.
Oh yeah.
Perfect example of that.
A naval blockade was established in Lavosia's star system of 26 Draconi, and all ships entering or leaving were searched. The UNSC Callisto, performing a routine inspection of a trading vessel, boarded the ship and searched its cargo. The outer colonists were frightened.
So moving into the Callisto sequence, again, this is something that is referenced a lot in the fiction. It's a big part of the, like what catalyzed the insurrection. But we've only ever seen it on the page, written as words. And I knew that this whole segment, like I wanted to break down the tactics in the same way that Nyland does, in a much more concise way. And I knew that it was going to be a big part of the video. It was going to be a whole segment in and of itself. So as we kind of got into editing and I realized who I was going to be collaborating with, I just thought to myself, you know what? Why don't I just let Wilson have this whole segment of the video to himself? Let's recreate the entire Callisto sequence and show the Callisto incident to people for the very first time in over 20 years of Halo fiction. This is the first time we've actually seen it in any capacity. Picking the ships was kind of fun. We had to get the models from the Sins of the Prophets guys, who were kind enough to let us use them once they understood what the project was. But all we have are the ship classes. We know that there were corvettes and destroyers involved. We don't actually know which specific corvettes and which specific destroyer classes. Some people might infer what they would be based on just the dates that this took place. But when I knew that we were going to be showing this visually, it was really important to me to show the most iconic ship designs, in my opinion. So I've always loved the Gladius class corvette. I think it's just a solid looking Halo ship design. And then of course the destroyer, it's got such a cool angular look. It's almost like if you took Star Destroyers from Star Wars and put them into Halo, this is what they'd look like. They're obviously much smaller, different capabilities, but just in terms of visual design, they have that angular triangle-like appearance. It's these destroyers, I think they're the Halberd class. They're probably my favorite Halo ship design of all time.
No, I love the design of those ships. I think there's one shot in here where it's literally just that ship appearing, and it looks very menacing. It's pretty sweet.
But I don't know if you had anything to add about like what ship classes would actually be most likely in the Callisto incident scenario.
They would have been earlier than the Halberd, I But I mean, it's just a representation. Your use of the ships, even the little the small freighter from Halo 4, was a nice touch. Not sure if that would exist in its same form, but it's visual and it got the point across. It was interesting though to see how you portrayed Cole's use of firing into the enemy ship when they went up to each other. I was actually picturing something more akin to in Amberclad with those kind of blue hatches. There's like 6 hatches along the side. And I pictured the 2 ships coming up beside each other, essentially, so when the doors open, the crews could essentially see each other. And then Cole's just kind of like, salute and poof, like fires a series of missiles off into them.
Yeah, we looked at a lot of renders of the ship and probably should have consulted a fiction expert a little bit more, but we made some educated guesses about where hangar bays and such would be. I like how the missile sequence came together. Just because of the timing with the music, the way it accelerates so aggressively into the Callisto, it just it's like you said, it might not capture exactly what canonically happened within the fiction, but it gets the narrative across and communicates the emotional weight that's needed.
Absolutely, yeah, fully agreed.
That was really one of those, producer decisions, because it's all of a sudden we were like, do we really have to, go inside this ship, figuring out interiors and, characters right there?
Yeah.
Or is there some way that we can figure out how to massively cut that corner and have a big, time saving and do it all from outside? And I didn't have faith that this would look so cool at the end to just do such a simple diagram style, but I think some of the overlay effects just really worked well.
I think the scale works really well too. It's a brief shot, but when you see the size of those people standing in the hangar bay, it just emphasizes the scale of naval warfare in Halo.
I appreciate the sequence where you have recreating the Callisto instant. You have the sort of schematic style, and then you have the if you were there. It kind of reminds you of like all those true crime recreations. Like, here's what happened.
Yeah, no, honestly, it did start a little bit like how you would, courtrooms have like car accidents. They got little magnet cars and they move it around. That's like literally what we had to start with here, because, we started collecting these models. Like, the Callisto sequence was by far the biggest one that we kind of had to like think through and prepare. I think we were collecting these models in like January of 23. So, literally a year ago, we were searching for these models and finding them. So it was super fun to like literally start with, hey, here's just some Hot Wheels models, move them around in the right way, figure out exactly, how to size it up, how to make sure the scale and the combat mechanics actually felt real and not just kind of floating around. And Isaac actually had some great, advice and adjustments to make the scale really feel like you're watching ships actually, dogfight in space rather than a, weird illustration or diagram looking thing where they're all too close or too small. So I think there is some real scale here, and it's such a fun way to kind of take the, the boundaries off and say, well, we are inside like a hologram, inside a holo table. So let's like take advantage of the space and keep it all, low poly graphics and really meld some cool stylistic choices here to get the effect accomplished.
Yeah, and that's interesting to talk about the distance that the combat takes place over, because a lot of science fiction has the ships super close to each other. Even some Halo sequences have done that. It's pretty standard. But then when you read the books, they're talking about firing missiles that are traveling thousands of kilometers to hit their target. It's the Halo universe is so grounded in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
It really emphasizes the fact that you're engaging in space, which is an infinite platform for naval warfare.
That's what that was almost it. It almost felt better to reference naval footage or naval combat rather than space combat, because you're right. Everything else is TIE fighters and X-Wings, real tight, close quarters shooting. So this was way different of, really space things out, really show how impact and the scale of the ships too. That really hit home.
And then we had a lot of fun picking the civilian crafts from available models as well. I believe we ended up pulling models from Halo 5. There's a couple multiplayer maps. You can see these on the ground and flying around.
I believe they show up on Meridian in the campaign. But it was just a nice way to kind of blend some different designs from different artists into one sequence.
Continuing the theme of throwing a bunch of stuff in a blender and kind of integrating it together.
Yep. And it works so well. Wilson had rendered the point defense guns firing without me giving any information on how they actually function within the fiction. So we just got lucky on that one that the first render happened to work and match up perfectly with how weapons on these ships actually function. Yeah, and I love that of the destroyer rendering in as a hologram. I actually used it twice. I loved it so much.
Nice. Yeah, it really is. Again, something super simple, but super, because of the design of the ship. Clearly, they hit it out of the park when they designed that thing. But yeah, super aggressive and intimidating.
However, this was a feint to allow a full unit of Orion soldiers to deploy covertly and destroy a key military base on the surface. They executed their task and extracted without ever being seen.
So I think when I was writing the script, or before I had even started writing the script, the Master Chief Collection got its update where you could actually wear the Orion armor, and they canonized that as existing within universe, because that armor had originally come from the 1999 demo, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Macworld.
Yep, but they updated it, gave it a nice facelift without changing the aesthetic, and then let you wear it in multiplayer. So I had to take the opportunity. I knew even before I wrote the script that I was going to do a little machinima sequence and show that armor walking around and use it to fill in some of the visual gaps. So I'm really glad that they decided to add that. Super useful for me. So in addition to using the Orion armor from Master Chief Collection, we also reached out to the same Halo community member that did the cognitive impression modeling sequence for us. And they were able to put together this just like phenomenal recreation of a set of Orion armor being closed off, which it doesn't echo anything within this video, but if you played Halo a lot, you'd know that that's based on the Arbiter's armor opening up as it's revealed to him for the first time. So we replicated that to kind of show the end of the Orion program as it's shuttered. Like maybe this armor still exists out there somewhere in the Halo universe and it's just waiting in storage. So really cool effect that came from working with the Halo community member there.
So obviously it ends with the creation of the Spartans. So what's part 2?
Well, part 2 will be Spartan 2. I'm really excited to get into editing that one. I've decided to give myself a little break just because this was so much work to get this first one out. I'm going to do some easier, faster, more enjoyable content just as a palate cleanser. But when we get back to the second installment in this series, it's going to be all Spartan program. We're going to focus solely on Halsey, the Spartans, the augmentations, and just kind of go step by step through what that experience was like for everyone involved. I'm excited for that one because I don't have to pull from as many diverse source materials. We have visuals for a lot of that stuff. Where there aren't visuals, I'm going to be using a lot of audio clips, which I think are going to work really well to give it more emotional weight, which is, I think, the phrase I've probably used the most during this podcast. But that's the thing that I really wanted to emphasize is pulling out not just, technically and politically what's been happening in the Halo universe, but what it meant for people, what it felt like, the severity of each discovery and each new milestone in human history. It was just important to me to emphasize the emotional aspect of that as well.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Sweet. Thanks, guys, for having me. Appreciate it.
And we'll have links to everything we talked about in the show notes, which you can find on our website, forwarduntodawn.com. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher. Check out our videos on YouTube at youtube.com/forwarduntodawn, or follow us on Twitter and presently, I think, Threads, we'll see, for updates on all our content, following the handle @ForwardDawn. Thanks for listening and see you next time.